Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 8, Episode 7 of our weekly Q&A videos.
You want to say more letters, don't you?
P and Q and C and A and T.
You want to.
I got used to the pattern of it. Q&A is good though. I'm okay with Q&A
right.
now. I've gotten used to it.
So just a quick sort of fixing this in time as an anchor for when this is happening, because even though we don't really do it's not like the recap where it's actually a specific week.
Yeah.
These are seasons and episodes, but tonight is the U.S. 2020 election.
Yeah.
Presidential, but there's also apparently some other seats in Congress that are up.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to say good luck to our neighbors to the south. And I guess the interesting thing to me is always, because we're looking at it from the outside in. And I know that when you're in it, it's sometimes certain things are, I guess, more important than they would be from a third-party observer. It's odd to me. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of noise. There's different things that people believe about what people are doing and what their intentions are. And I think you can't always know what people are thinking or trying to do. And depending on what news sources you have access to, you can't always know all the absolute facts, because there's lots of people who have a vested interest in creating the kind of tension.
I would say all news actually has a vested interest in seizing market share, and it's just however they go about it.
Yeah. So the part that seems less controversial, that I think even I don't want to really say both sides. It's become such a loaded phrase, but I guess I have to. That both sides seem to agree on as a fact is that there's one party that is making an attempt to invalidate votes, and the other is fighting to have votes count. And I guess it depends on whether you believe that there's a huge amount of voter fraud that it makes it worth getting rid of hundreds of thousands of legitimate votes.
Yeah.
It's like the pandemic, right? There's certain facts to me that override everything else. Back when people were saying, well, pandemic's not such a big deal, and the overriding idea that stuck with me was, listen, you've got Italy. It's got one of the best healthcare systems in the world. They were being overrun to the point where they were doing
Battlefield triage?
Battlefield triage, yeah. And as a modern country, in the decades that I've been alive, I'd never seen that happen. That to me, more so than the number of people who were dying, the number of people that were recovering, who had morbidity and were sick afterwards, that didn't matter nearly as much as the fact that this was sort of big news. It was a big deal. And to me, that's the same sort of thing where if there's one party that's trying to disenfranchise voters and have people's votes not count, that to me would make them seem to be clearly the bad guys.
Yeah, it's a worrying precedent.
Yeah, especially when, I always see this argument, and I'm not sure how important it is, where you talk about, well, it's not a democracy, it's a republic. Well, it's a democratic republic.
Yeah.
And
also, how much Trump jokes about just staying in office, even if he loses.
Yeah. Or
not even if he loses. More like, more terms. Like, past his, limit is kind of funky to me.
So, but this is odd to me, too, because I never did much history in high school, and definitely not a lot of American history, but, I mean, that's a relatively new kind of thing. Wasn't that an amendment that, I mean, who was it? Was it Roosevelt? There's some guy who had 4 terms. And it was sometime after that they decided that it was better for the country to only have a maximum of 2 terms.
Yeah.
So, I don't even mind that so much. For all the things that Trump does that bug me, that's not one of them. I mean, it's part of the larger pattern where, some idea that it seems like he's trying to float it first to see how people react and then walk it back if there's a negative reaction.
It's just weird.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is just skirting, like, the law, or it would be, right? What he's suggesting is something that you're not supposed to be allowed to do. He's like, I might do it for fun.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And it's a lot of talk. Again, for all the different things, I mean, to me, the bigger thing is undermining the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah.
It's challenging in court to change the rules for votes so that even though people got instructions to say, as long as it's postmarked by today, it'll be accepted as long as whenever the post office delivers it.
Yeah.
It's the idea that somehow it's weird that you can't know the results the day of. That's been historically, nobody knows who wins. And it's just the media that makes a prediction based on the counts that have been tabulated up to that point.
It is also, there's a lot of stuff that's weird about this election. It seems weird that you can change a law that will invalidate people's votes potentially from before you've changed the law, right? When people follow due process, and then in between the time that they follow due process and the votes are supposed to be counted, that the due process changes. Seems wrong to me.
The closest thing we've had to that recently was the elections for city council in Toronto, where in the middle of the campaign, so not after votes were counted, but before votes were made. What's the verb for votes?
Votes were voted? I don't know.
Votes were cast? Cast. Ballots were cast. So the ballots were cast and they voted. The premier, Doug Ford, reduced the number of city council seats, even though the campaigns had already started. I mean, that's close as we came, and it feels like sort of the same kind of thing, even though it's not.
Yeah.
But so it's not like we're immune to that kind of interference.
Yeah, but that's pre-vote still.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the things is that, you know, as citizens, you don't actually have a lot of control over anything in your government really outside of voting. There's a certain amount of, like, protesting or signing petitions or, like, calling representatives. There's ways to impact politicians once they are in power. But the main way that you are encouraged to do things, and definitely the easiest way, or should be the easiest way for most people, is to vote. And it's weird to have that sort of main mechanism be changing like that. Like, as people are sending in votes, the rules are changing. And, you know, for people who sent in a vote for a mail-in ballot,
right,
and then are being told that if it's doesn't get there in time, that their vote doesn't count. And the question becomes, is it legal for me to still, like, go in and vote in person?
Yeah.
What's my recourse, right?
Yeah.
If you're telling me that there's a chance that my vote's not going to be counted, what do I do? Right?
Yeah.
And that is a weird position, and I'm sure maybe somebody knows what the rules are for that, the people who are in the state, but
I think it's changing and it's up for grabs right now because there was that case that went to I think it was the Texas Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So I think it's still a little bit in flux, but you know what? It just occurred to me too, the idea of invalidating a lot of votes in order to make sure that there isn't even one mistake. Like, how many thousands of votes is it worth, of good votes is it worth getting rid of to get rid of one fraudulent vote? And to me, it's very much like the argument about capital punishment. Like, how many innocent people
proven guilty,
is it worth killing in order to be able to
root out the bad ones,
have capital punishment for the really heinous crimes?
It is kind of the opposite of innocent until proven guilty. It's like, we'll cut out a wide swath and hopefully we'll catch however many we're saying there are in the net.
Right. And it seems to me, I mean, I guess it would be different if you could say that there was voter fraud from individual ballots at a large enough size to make it worth doing that. But when in all the research that they've done about how much fraudulent voting there's been a relatively small number. And if there's going to be any kind of fraud, it's probably going to be more efficient to do it at an institutional level. Yeah. Where you've got access to the voting machines. But anyways.
There's a lot going on right now. It's fine. We'll see soon enough. I think the polls, I know 538's poll gave Biden like an 89% chance of winning.
How much did Hillary Clinton have 4 years ago?
On 538's polls?
70-something%, wasn't it?
I think it might have been 60 or something.
Was it that low? I don't.
It was.
I feel like a lot of people were saying
Nate Silver and 538 had a different polling average where they were saying that it was much closer.
I know, but I think a lot of the others, not 538, were giving Clinton a higher percentage.
Yeah, and
that 538 did a better job, but it was still something in favor of Clinton. It feels like it was something. Yeah,
it still was in favor of Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the problem with percent chances, right?
Right.
When you're saying that it's kind of close, like a 70% chance is still...
It's like you never see... Okay, your mom pointed this out to me once. That the weather, they never predict 50% chance of precipitation.
Yeah.
Even though functionally 40 or 60% is the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because 50% means, hey, we don't know, flip a coin. And that level of sort of randomness, I guess would undermine any kind of authority.
Yeah, I guess if you say exactly 50-50, that sucks.
It's like, okay, I don't know anybody else who's listening to this watches Corner Gas. There's that great joke. I don't even remember who does it.
Karen, I think.
Is it Karen?
Or Davis, one of the cops.
And it's the idea that there's two options. And whenever there's two options, no matter what the likelihood of each one is...
It's Karen.
Okay, so 50-50, right?
Yeah.
So
Karen, Davis, and Lacey are at the Ruby. Lacey is talking about what are the odds of a riot breaking out in Dog River, and then Karen goes 50-50. And then Lacey goes, how do you figure that? And Karen goes, well, it's 50-50. It either happens or it doesn't. 50-50. And then Davis goes, yeah, 50-50.
All right, so anybody listening who hasn't seen that, that's a great show. To me, it was when I was growing up, all Canadian shows were crappy. It should
speak to how good the show is that I can remember that scene almost word for word. I'm pretty sure if we watched that scene, it would be a pretty quick quote.
Yeah.
And then Lacey says something along the lines of, oh, well, if... I forget, too, it's some sort of... If, like, a gang comes in and starts throwing around ketchup packets, they'll give you free coffee. It's in an early episode, too. I think that's in the first season.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly.
And one other thing before we get to questions, we want to talk about CB, our cat. So it's amazing to me how much he's changed and how little he's changed in some ways. And because I mark it, we bought him a piece of cat furniture.
Yeah.
He avoided it like the plague.
Yeah, that he had been on every single other piece of furniture in the room much more than he had the cat furniture.
I think, but it's not even much more. It almost seemed like he was avoiding it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but I guess in the world of having a cat, everything gets magnified a bit, right? So it's things that if I wasn't...
Yeah, because they don't do very much. You sort of got to make it exciting for yourself.
So the toys that we used to entice him to get near the cat furniture seem to have an effect, because now he's using the scratching post on it, and I actually caught him.
He was always using the scratching post on it. From day one.
Really?
Yeah, I've been seeing him. I'm in that room a lot. I've been seeing him use the scratching post since day one of it.
I caught him actually climbing on it independently without us enticing him.
Finally.
And he's doing really well. I think he's gained, we talked about he gained a bunch of weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't shed very much, which is surprising, because when we first met him, I wonder if it was because it was warmer weather, or because
he was malnourished.
Yeah.
And alone and rabid.
Because, like people apparently, like people talk about this, like their hair gets really soft and shiny when they eat really well. It's not just like washing it, but when their diet is poor, they have or they're stressed, a bunch of their hair falls out where they're not. So I think cats in a lot of ways are very much like people.
Yeah. Maybe. Who knows? But that's our cat update. We spent a long time just talking about stuff.
Yeah.
This week. We haven't even gotten any of our questions yet, so I think...
So maybe we should do everybody a favor and put in the description, it's too late now, we'll put in the description when the first question starts. So somewhere around the 14.5 minute mark, because they would, in order to hear it, they'd have
to... If you've been listening this whole time, we'll tell you the questions are starting right now. So, our first question comes from Trips, user Trips, TRIPZ, and they say, does anyone know when Flashpoint Deathstroke will be multiplayer reward?
February 2021. So we're actually not that far away. It sounds like whenever I say another year, I always screw this up whenever the new year changes because I keep on writing the old year. It feels like 2021 should be a long time away, but that's only, 3 months?
And, yeah. So there we go. That's one of the only times in this entire series, at least in the last while, where somebody asks us a question and we can just... There's one answer. There's nothing else to say.
And I'm willing to say, there's a chance we're going to be wrong, but the pattern's been consistent. The cycle's been consistent since November.
I'm going to call it right now because nobody's going to remember this if we're wrong. There's a 100% chance we're going to be right. You say there's a chance we're going to be wrong? I don't think so. Complete confidence, unearned.
It is. But this speaks to the idea. The multiplayer awards have been really consistent, and the challenges have been everywhere. You get something that hasn't been here for 4 years, and then you have something that was a few months ago.
Yeah, I'm calling it a sure thing. If anybody's listening to this right now, or anybody remembers this, and it's not a February 2021 challenge, the first person to comment it, I'll I don't know, buy you a game on Steam or something. There will be some sort of reward.
Right.
Sort of reward that has monetary value.
Oh, speaking of monetary, I'm reading this really good book. It's interesting. I don't know how legitimate it is. It's called The Deficit Myth. She references a lot of the things that she says. It's almost in some ways, it's almost like a textbook that way. But the most interesting premise of the book is that it's more important to manage inflation using monetary policy than it is to manage unemployment. And that there's a lot of things, by aiming at the wrong targets, you end up in doing the wrong things about, raising interest rates or whatever. And underlying all that is the idea that when you've got a country that has a fiat money system, you can explain that if you want, that they are currency issuers instead of currency users.
Yeah.
That especially when they're no longer tied to other currencies or actual things like gold.
Yeah.
That the idea of running a deficit is not a bad thing. They could actually wipe out their deficit instantly if they wanted to. And the problem is that if they generate too much money, isn't that they will cause massive unemployment. It's that they will bid up the available resources. If there's not a lot of slack in your economy, putting more money will actually just drive up prices instead of making life better for everybody. So it's interesting. It's definitely food for thought. I'm usually not that on topic that reading stuff that quickly when it comes out, but this was a 2020 book and it's really interesting.
Okay, so there we go.
Speaking of money.
Yeah, I think we'll skip forward just a little bit because we got more political stuff here. We'll maybe come back to it, but we'll do injustice stuff first because we started with the first 15 minutes of just political stuff anyways. So we've got a question from N1937-0 or 0. I don't know. This name was clearly not meant to be read. Legal name. So I'm not gonna put too much effort into it. Pronunciation is not quite as important. They say, what's the secondary effects of all the damage over times? Can someone list it, please?
So there's no... when I first saw the question in my mind, it felt like most of them had something and there's only one that was good. And as I was looking at the list, there's actually only 2 damage over time effects that have a secondary effect. And that's bleeding, which is the only one that matters. It gives you a 20% damage boost. So somebody who's bleeding, if you hit them, you do 20% extra damage. It stacks. Practical point of view, the most I've been able to get it to stack is 3 times. But when you've got a bleeder, not a bleeder, like a cutter. Is it a cutter or slasher? A stabber, like Aquaman or Catwoman. You got 3 bars. To me, it's almost better to do 3 quick special ones than it is to do anything else. Only because what you've done then is you've boosted damage. I think because it's multiplicative, you do more than 60. What's 1.2 times 1.2? That's 1.44 times 1.2 is, it's close to a 70% boost. It feels like it should be 65 to 70% boost. So boosting that much damage, it's not just that attack, and it's not just the damage over time that gets boosted. Then you tag in somebody else whose hits will get boosted that way too for a short period of time, mind you. But still, that's absolutely brilliant. Then you got the only other one is poison, which means that a character that's been poisoned only deals 20%, only deals 80%. Their damage is reduced by 20%.
Yeah.
And that's okay, I guess. To me, that's still a defensive ability. And anytime you have the option between offensive and defensive, offensive all the way. Mm-hmm. Defensive just drags the fight out longer. If it's going to have the same impact on outcome, I want the outcome to happen faster.
Yeah.
And then I guess the ones that we're just seeing right now, right? Which is when Aquaman does it, he has his own built-in bleed on Special 1, but we've given him LexCorp, I can't remember which one we gave him. Helmet, I think. It's at the beginning of the video when we show all the gears, but I think it's LexCorp Helmet that gives him damage over time, and that's fire. No secondary effect from fire. Mm-hmm. Mental damage, I don't think anybody else besides Martian Manhunter does that, and that is also nothing extra. So the only one that really matters is the bleed. If I had a choice, I'd pick bleeding anytime. Although, here's the other thing too, right? I guess no. All damage over time has the same problem when you face a Blackest Night Flash team. So really it is, I want it to bleed. Mm-hmm. Bleed.
So there we go. We have our next question, which is one in probably a couple that we're going to end up getting to depending on what we have time today, from Drake Pendragon. And they say, USA Today even says that police shooting unarmed blacks being a problem is a myth. Here's the article. And then links a USA Today article.
I do want to say about Drake, I actually appreciate the way he's been willing to engage with us.
Yeah. And I think it's something that's very important for people to do generally, which is to be willing to consistently engage with people that they disagree with, mm-hmm. To a certain level, and to come in good faith, where clearly Drake Pendragon and us disagree on...
Oh yeah, fundamentally.
Like, pretty much everything political that we've talked about so far.
Right.
But also, he continues to come back, and then when our hard drive fails, he's like, oh, sorry about your hard drive, right?
Yeah.
And so, he's engaging with us and treating us like people still.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. I hope we're doing the same. I hope it seems like we're doing the same.
Yeah, which he does keep coming back to comment, so...
Maybe that's reflection on him and not on us.
Yeah, but... Yeah, we do try to at least let everybody participate in a discussion here. And we're not going to pretend like everybody's perspective is equally right or anything. And obviously we do come in with our own perspective, and we're going to feel like it's not biased, right? But there is going to be bias.
Right.
But, we're not ideological. We're not like in centrist being like, well, everybody's got a point. But we do hope that we can at least cultivate a discussion in which people who disagree with us are still willing to stick around.
Yeah. So that was the sort of the intro to the answer. So I actually did read the article. So when Drake says that USA Today even says that police shooting unarmed blacks being a problem is a myth, it's not even what they said. It's an opinion piece. It actually does acknowledge that being black and unarmed has an increased risk of being killed. The point was that it wasn't happening enough to be considered an epidemic. So what they were saying was it's not an epidemic because the numbers that are being killed are so small. And what they actually quote, so the quote from the article, what they actually referred to was a CDC report. So I'll quote the article. Nationally, African Americans between the ages of 10 and 34 die from homicide at 13 times the rate of white Americans, according to researchers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the Justice Department. So epidemic has actually a very specific meaning, right? So it's a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. For example, a flu epidemic. And it's been used enough where it doesn't necessarily have to be an infectious disease.
Yeah.
But it can be just some sort of occurrence that normally there's a negative connotation, but people, I guess, have used it ironically to do is just to refer to any kind of thing that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. So it probably makes a little bit of sense to maybe separate or sort of break down that question to the point. So how many killings are acceptable? Like how many killings would it... So if it's not an epidemic, is it still a problem?
Yeah.
And I want to... So the other... Later on in the article says, the number of unarmed black shooting victims is down 63% from 2015 when the database began. There are about 7,300 black homicide victims a year, the 14 unarmed victims. So this is all police stuff, though. The 14 unarmed victims in fatal police shootings would comprise only 0.2% of that total. So 13 times higher is huge. But what they're saying is the relative risk might be really high, but the absolute risk is low. So the chance of you being one of them is low, but you increase your chances a lot.
Unarmed victims in fatal police shootings, and we should be clear here, they're saying shootings, right? Not just like killing. So like George Floyd would not...
He wouldn't count
as one of those, and different, violence enacted against people also wouldn't count. So police brutality, we're sort of narrowing the definition very specifically, and that, not to get off topic, but that reminds me of that statistic where they talked about the NYPD and their accuracy rate when discharging a firearm that included cop suicide by gun, which is just absolutely ghoulish. Which again, it isn't to say that the number isn't accurate, right?
Right.
But it's just to say that, or not even that the number's not worth looking at either, right? That we should discount it. But it's always important to look at sort of exactly what people are saying with their data and what they're turning it into. Right. So in this case, unarmed victims in fatal police shootings is what they're talking about.
Right.
So you could, look at that, and that is valid, and that is worth talking about. But you could also look at people who were armed but did not have any violent response against the police, right? People who were legally allowed to carry a weapon, right? Concealed carry, different stuff like that.
Right.
You could look at people who were not killed in shootings, right? And you could look at a lot of other statistics involving... This is specifically looking at, like, homicide, right? Which is... in deaths, right? But that is sort of only one facet of the whole picture. Right. But again, none of that's to say we shouldn't look at this. It's just those are always important things when you're looking at statistics, is what they're saying, what they're not saying, what sort of the goal, what they're trying to get across with their statistic. And there clearly is here a little bit of a bias towards making the number smaller, right? Because they're comparing all homicides, not just gun homicides, right? Of black people. Right. And they're not including all unarmed killings of black men by police. They're only including shootings. So there's a little bit of a difference in...
But I still think that it's a good starting point to have a discussion, because I want to point at what jumped out to me was that this is something where even though you start off with a relatively small number, you can increase it big, but it's still, the increased number is still relatively small.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to compare it to was something where maybe we've got a more, a better feel, like a gut feel for this, because we've been dealing with this so much longer. Lung cancer. So the American Cancer Society's estimates for lung cancer in the U.S. for 2020 are just over 200,000 new cases of lung cancer a year, and they've got a man and women breakdown, and about 136,000 deaths from lung cancer. 136,000. So 136,000 is about 20 times more deaths than black homicide victims per year, right? Lung cancer is by far the leading cause of cancer death among both men and women, making up almost 25% of all cancer deaths. Each year, more people die of lung cancer than of colon, breast, and prostate cancers combined. So this is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And does that map well onto the 20 times as many deaths as the black homicides? It does, right? I think it's not, one order of magnitude bigger, right? It's not, it's close enough. Like, you wouldn't want the number of killings to be comparable to the...
I think you just need to get to your point, because I think you've lost it a little bit.
So, the smoking gives you a 2 to 4 times relative risk increase in women, but it's a 4 to 11 times relative risk in men with smoking. We've made the connection, right? Smoking is really bad. Socially, we've made the case now that it's not acceptable, that, remember when it used to be that you could smoke basically anywhere?
Yeah.
Like, even on airplanes.
There's a lot of places you can't smoke. You're less likely to get matches on, like, dating apps if you smoke, all that stuff.
Right. So there's clearly been culture
Or if there's a picture with you smoking on the dating app, not if you smoke. I don't know what those odds are.
So clearly that connection, where at most it increases your risk by 11 times as much, is enough to say, hey, we recognize that smoking is not, whatever benefits it has doesn't balance out against this one negative thing.
Yeah.
Never mind, like, chronic lung disease, right? So I think the fact that it's the number of people killed is what they're talking about. That as a problem, though, it's probably as important, I guess, to me, a risk factor as smoking is to lung cancer, because we're talking that same sort of size of impact, like a bigger impact.
Instead of 2 to 4 times relative risk versus 4 to 11 times relative risk for smoking in lung cancer, it's a 13 times relative risk from being black.
Yeah.
And being shot by police.
Right.
So the modifier, the
Right.
increase in risk is proportionally bigger.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. For smoking and cancer and being black and being shot by police.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really challenging.
But this is why, like, because I hadn't considered that before, right? So when Drake brings something like this up, I don't necessarily agree with him, but I'm willing to consider it enough and bring my sort of thoughts on other ideas to try to make sense of where it fits in, right? Because a lot of these things we haven't really... It's not like we grew up thinking... or it's unlike smoking, where we grew up thinking smoking is bad. Mm-hmm. Where it's already been established. These are this stuff about police brutality is relatively, for us at least, a new kind of discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I like the next question from Drake, actually. Like, Drake had a lot of questions, and we're, picking out the ones that we want to talk about because there's just something interesting that I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah. So maybe we'll answer the next Drake question, and then we'll go to Dus's questions, and then we'll see what time we have when we're through that. So Drake says, the idea that policing started with racism is stupidly illogical because police can be traced back further than the whole racist BS. So...
I think, and that was addressed, I think, to me when I sort of did a throwaway comment saying, so let's not even touch the idea that policing started from racism, because, I mean, it's nuanced, it's complicated, and I think it's not without its own controversy.
And so the first thing that I want to say is that, and I know that this is not what he meant, so I'm not going to nitpick it, but, like, you go back far enough, and everybody was racist. So if you're going back farther than before the racism as the start of police, I know you meant, like, it's not the thing that was starting the police, but the further you go back generally, in America, certainly, and in most places, treating another race of people terribly with no justification is only becomes more prevalent. And so even if you're going back and finding another route that wasn't directly racist, you are talking about a fundamentally probably more racist society that was implementing it. Like, if you talk about Canada, right? Our terrible treatment of Indigenous people. Yeah. Constantly. From the moment that anybody who is not Indigenous stepped foot in Canada, we've been doing terrible things to Indigenous people in this country.
And our first Prime Minister was really guilty of that. For all the things, that he did that in terms of leading the brand new country. Yeah. He was a pretty crappy kind of guy for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah. So, you go back far enough in almost any country, and there's racism more and more is a fundamental reason why society is the way it is. And that's definitely true for everybody and everywhere in North America, where you have the land because you took it from somebody, if you go back far enough. Right. So, and the sort of further you go back, we've been on a sort of sliding scale from taking the land and being like, we should do this, and this is a good thing to do, to sort of where we are now, which is most people being like, well, we shouldn't have done that then, and we can move on now, though, right? So we're sort of, there's been a sliding scale of getting better about it, but go back far enough and there is more racism. But I know that that's not what Drake meant, and so we're not gonna make an argument that he didn't actually mean and then pick that apart.
And it's clear that what I meant maybe wasn't coming across, or it's whatever. Because part of me, I had sort of the general idea, and having. When Drake asked this or pointed out, it made me take a little bit more of a deeper dive. So I'm going to read from more than a couple sources. The first one's going to be Eastern Kentucky University, their police studies online. And there was a real sort of difference between North and South. In the southern states, the development of American policing followed a different path. The genesis of the modern police organization in the South is the slave patrol. The first formal slave patrol was created in the Carolina colonies in 1704. slave patrols had three primary functions. One, to chase down, apprehend, and return to their owners runaway slaves. Two, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolts. And three, to maintain a form of discipline for slave workers who were subject to summary justice outside of the law if they violated any plantation rules. Following the Civil War, these vigilante-style organizations evolved in modern Southern police departments primarily as a means of controlling freed slaves, who were now laborers working in an agricultural caste system and enforcing Jim Crow segregation laws, designed to deny freed slaves equal rights and access to political system. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't all across the U.S., but I think the history there, and mainly for the benefit of those who are thinking that's a biased source, there's an article from Time, and I'm going to link all these in the description. There's an article from Time. In the South, however, the economics that drove the creation of police forces were centered not on the protection of shipping interests, but on the preservation of the slavery system. Yeah. So, some of the primary policing institutions there were the slave patrols tasked with chasing down runaways and preventing slave revolts, Potter says. The first formal slave patrol had been created in the Carolina colonies in 1704. During the Civil War, the military became the primary form of law enforcement in the South, but during Reconstruction, many local sheriffs functioned in a way analogous to the earlier slave patrols, enforcing segregation and the disenfranchisement of freed slaves. In general, throughout the 19th century and beyond, the definition of public order, that which the police officer was charged with maintaining, depended on whom was asked. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting to me, right? Like the history of policing, until I'd read some of this, maybe one more? Sure. Insider.com, history of the police in the U.S. So it started off with something called the Night Watch. And they described it as, the Night Watch was made up of men who volunteered for nights' worth of work. Sometimes people were put on the watch as a form of punishment for committing a crime. These watchmen, however, were known to sleep and drink while on duty. The first Night Watch was founded in Boston in the 1630s, and New York followed suit in the 1650s. During this time period, the wealthiest in the colonies also hired people for protection. Those hired for protection were mostly criminals. The history of the police in the South differs from other parts of the country because of the prominence of slavery. The first form of policing in the South was known as slave patrol, which began in the colonies of Carolina in 1704. The patrol was usually made up of 3 to 6 men riding horseback and carrying whips, ropes, and even guns. The group's main duties included chasing and hunting escaped slaves, releasing terror on slave communities to prevent riots, and to keep plantation owners in check, according to Ben Fountain's book, Beautiful Country Burn Again. The slave patrols lasted until the Civil War and eventually gave way to the Ku Klux Klan. Interesting. Again, yeah. It's something that I it's not like I knew this. It's that I've been doing a lot more reading over the last couple of years, and it's amazing the kind of stuff that pops up. I never took history. I hated history when I was in high school, and it's only when I started reading historians that actually had a knack for telling stories, specifically Ada Palmer, that I started reading a lot more nonfiction like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and, all of this to say, there's a reason, part of the reason why we glossed over that point is because depending on what point you're trying to make, sometimes that's a relevant point and sometimes that's not, right? And, like, we're not trying to argue that they're all exactly the same as they were back then, because clearly that's not true, right? It's just that, and, people and groups and organizations can all change, right? And they can be affected both internally and externally. And I think the important part is, though, that you have to be willing to acknowledge the DNA of it, right? Yeah. And part of the reason that change, like when change is able to take place, one of the things that influences whether change takes place is being able to acknowledge where you started and where you come from, right? And so that sort of, the fact of it is important, I would argue. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, history's gotten a lot more interesting to me as I get older.
Yeah. And it's still relevant. It's interesting. Yeah. So, anyways, our next question, we're going to get into some non-political stuff for a while, I think. And then maybe come back to it depending on time.
Oh, is it Ian Connor's question?
Yeah. Well, we'll do Zildjian first.
Oh, okay.
So, this is just fun. This is just a little aside, maybe a palate cleanser. So, Zildjian, Rucker, and we probably would have said something different the first time. I don't remember how you pronounced it in the original video, but that's the whole point of it. It's Zildjian. DJ. Oh my gosh.
You want to try that
DJIAN.
again?
Yeah.
You want to practice?
ZILDJIAN.
Yeah.
And they say, haha, 2 years ago. Damn. Zildjian would be how it's pronounced, but definitely one of the better attempts at my name. And so we like this, first off, because it gives us an excuse to pronounce and then I guess spell incorrectly. I pronounced it correctly and then I moved to spelling it wrong. But this is just funny because the comment, which was 4 days ago, was on a video that, as the comment indicates, was posted 2 years ago. Which...
So it never occurred to me that there would be any kind of audience for our Q&As that are older.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to me that somebody actually is going back and
it's also shocking that somebody who asked the question and then had it answered like a week or two later, waited 2 years to come back and then found their place again somehow. I think that's really interesting to me because I can't imagine. Maybe they just missed that video.
Yeah.
And they were going back through it. I don't know. I would love to hear from Zildjian again.
Oh yeah,
but
what happened? Like where?
Yeah, like what the context was specifically, and we bring this up in the next Q&A that they answer. But at this rate, it's going to be another 2 years before we hear from them again.
Because this is what I was saying exactly about CB, right? Like the idea that what's the story, and we'll never get our answer from CB because he'll never be able to tell us. It's always interesting to me. Where did CB come from before he came to us? Yeah. And a lot of the things that we sort of imagine him to believe or feel when we attribute sort of human thoughts and emotions are sort of predicated on what we assume happened to him before he got to us, right? Like, how we feel like certain things, maybe he appreciates them more because of how we imagine his life. Deprivation, yeah. And I would love to hear that kind of story, but we never will. But this is one of those cases where we will, but it'll be...
Yeah, I want to hear the specific context for you and what route took you 2 years away from the video and then back to it in the year of our Lord 2020.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say about the name, so whatever... I think you always take a lot of the heat, I think, for mispronunciations because you end up reading the questions a lot more.
And we say heat. Nobody's ever come after us for mispronouncing
No, that's
names.
True. But I feel like the part... I don't remember how... I'd have to go back to watch the video to see where it was off, but I feel like the DJ part would be obvious to me... Would have been obvious to me as like
Zildjian or something.
No, like Jin. Yeah. So because I've been playing Words with Friends a bit more lately. And one of the keys is maximizing the value of the higher point letters. And J is a 10-point letter. Yeah. And it's a pain to try to make a word with J, especially if it's short. And one of the easy ways where it's a sort of high value word is Jin, like for genie, DJIN with one or two N's. And it feels like when I see Zildjian's name like that would not have been the part that I would have gotten wrong. And Rucker seems pretty straightforward, right? Like it's just
Rucker.
Yeah, I guess. If we gotten Rucker wrong, I think that would have been the comment. So I think it's the Zildjian. Maybe it's the IAN.
I don't know. One of the better attempts. Either way.
Okay, so thank you. We appreciate the feedback, and we'd love to hear more.
Yeah.
So hopefully in 2022, when you're watching this, you'll let us know.
I don't think I've ever shared this story, but this is funny. Before we get into injustice, this is just entertaining. There was a kid in my class in high school whose name was Mikey, and there was a professor. I don't remember what his accent was, like from what culture, but I know that he spoke with a moderate accent.
Right.
Couldn't tell you where he was from. And he was the substitute teacher for our class at least 2 times in the class that I had with Mikey. And he... Oh, no. So it was at least 3 times, because I know he got it right by the 3rd time, actually. And so Mikey, M-I-K-E-Y, had his name pronounced... Do you want to guess?
Mickey?
Mickey was the first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second time...
Because it's the hard K sound, right?
Yeah. And, if it weren't another word, right? If Mickey weren't like the Mickey Mouse Association,
right,
you wouldn't really care about it. So Mickey's fair. And the other time his name was mispronounced, do you want to take any guess?
McKay?
Milky.
Milky?
Which has to be...
Okay. Okay.
Which has to have been a combination of misreading it and mispronouncing it.
But don't you find that a lot of times, so I meet people for the first time who are from Africa, who have African names. And don't you find that, and a lot of times I actually end up, they say that maybe they're just, letting me down easy, but they tell me that I do a pretty good job at figuring out how to pronounce their names.
Yeah.
A lot of the times people have difficulties because they scan over the name too quickly.
Yeah.
They add or take away letters that are there. So it's not just the pronunciation, but because if the name is longer, but I mean, Milky is such a short name. Yeah. It's hard to add the letter. But that a lot of mispronunciations come from because there's a bunch of syllables in it. Yeah. And people scan over it so quickly. Milky. Okay. Milky Mickey.
I promise you it never gets less funny. The fact that he went from Mickey to Milky, like the degradation in pronunciation between the first and second try.
He added an L. All right, so I mean,
spectacular. Yeah, no, because there's no way.
If the name was Milkey, then you would still pronounce it Milky. I would still pronounce that Milky.
Yeah,
even with the extra E.
So it was just I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as I live, I'll take that with me because it was
That's
such
good. Oh, I'm glad you told me that story.
It's pretty joyful. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I mentioned it on the channel before.
Never. I haven't heard it. If you mentioned it, it would have been a week I wasn't here.
Yeah, so there we go.
All right.
Get an F in the chat for Milky. But our next question comes from Ian Connor, and they say, "Hey BDCKR, another question for y'all. Recently, Blackest Night Flash was the multiplayer award, and I placed in the top 2 so I could get him. I was going for top 1 and was in it for the whole season, but lost it at the last 20 minutes of the challenge. I was very sad," and then there's a sad face. "I have him promoted 1.
Why don't people say saddy face like the way they say smiley face?
Because it sounds bad.
Saddy face.
I think the second it came out of your mouth, you figured out why.
Saddy face.
I have him promoted 1, as well as the rest of the Blackest Night team. For me, it's Hawkgirl and Batman. Now here's where I'm torn. For Blackest Night Flash, I don't know if I should have him as my special specialist or as my tank. He has a very strong special too, but his passive also leans into having him be a strong tank, the bit about him reviving with full health. If he's my special specialist, I'd gear him with Tantu Totem, Master's Death Guard, and Necron Scythe to use the passive more. But if I have him as my tank, then I would have Batman as my special specialist. I also don't really know what to do with Hawkgirl. Would she be good as a basic damage dealer, or would Batman or Flash do that? I'm so confused. My first thought is to go immediately to have Flash be the special specialist and Batman be the basic damage dealer, but then I'm not really capitalizing on the fact that Flash can revive at full health multiple times. My next thought is to switch those roles. Flash is also a strong basic damage dealer, and Batman has a strong special too. I would have Batman as a special specialist, Flash as a basic damage dealer, and Hawkgirl as a tank. I would love it if you guys told me what you would do in next week's P&Q and CNA&T. I know that's not its formal name, but I still think it's funny. Or made a separate video about it, like you so kindly did for my Earth 2 team questions. And then they say Komoda.
Yeah.
Which is very nice.
Okay.
I love these questions because, again, this is the ideal team question. Clearly, Ian Connor knows how to ask a good question.
Right, and he's put some thought into it, too.
Because he's asked the question good enough for us to make a full video on it in the past. Right. And there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of things to bounce off of. And there's like here's what I'm thinking here, and here's why. Here's what this option is, and here's why. And it lets us answer things a lot more concretely.
Okay, and I think you've glossed over completely the fact that the short form he used for Blackest Night was BK.
Instead of BN.
Yeah, right. And I think actually BK is the perfect abbreviation, even though it's night as in night and day, not night as in knight in shining armor.
Yeah.
And so BK could actually be Burger King. But the Blackest Night is perfect because it helps you distinguish between Blackest Night and Batman Ninja.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, because I'm used to the universes and the characters, when I first read this, I didn't even realize that he had done that differently. And I didn't even realize that technically it should be BN and not BK. And my brain just substituted it correctly because I'm like, B something. It's Blackest Night.
Yeah.
Right? There's only one thing it could have been.
I think people should use that in general, but I think it'd be hard to get everybody shift because then what it does is you take away the ambiguity. People know who you're talking about, but then you're going to have pedantics like we usually are, who would argue that that's wrong.
Yeah, but in this case,
I think it's great. So it's definitely interesting, right? So we used to feel that way, that when we were making sort of enhancing a character for a specific role on the team, that you would lean all into it. And I think until some of the later characters and later gears came, that was the right way to do it. Because if you wanted a really good basic damage dealer, you only had 3 slots. You needed all 3 slots to make them really good. And then you get somebody like Flashpoint Batman, who, even without using all 3 slots, with even just 2 slots, was so overwhelmingly good as a basic damage dealer that using up that last slot to make him do more basic damage, what you had were diminishing returns. You couldn't finish people off fast enough to make up for the even small chance that he was vulnerable to being hit with a special. So then it made more sense on Flashpoint Batman to give him Astro Harness in 1 gear slot, and then use the other 2 for basic damage boost. And I think what we're getting here is something similar, where Blackest Night Flash is, like you said, it's an amazing tank, because he has the chance to not only have the opponent whiff on basic damage attack, he would also have an opening, unlike other times where, like, say, one of the 4th row gears, I don't remember which one, you get they whiff, you don't have an opening. He whiffs, whoever whiffs freezes and is stuck, and you're totally wide open. Free special. And on top of that, being able to, when you get a revive, full health. So absolutely, the first one you need to have, and you get that from Blackest Night Hawkgirl. If you want to lean into it a little bit more with Necron Scythe, so that if he knocks somebody out, that's great, because Necron Scythe has a bit more offensive potential too, right? When his health is low. However, you can make him more tanky. It doesn't actually make him any better, because if he's that tanky, but you've taken away any offensive potential, he's going to be useless. I think the best argument here is that you make him a specialist. Give him lots of power with Tentu Totem and Master's Death card. Give him Necron Scythe, so he gets a revive after he knocks out the first person. But you don't need to make him revive one more time and take up more gear slots.
That's already almost like a tank just by accident.
Right. So you tag him in. Maybe, I haven't played him like this, but maybe when we tag him in, what you do is you wait. Let him take a few swings at you. You can't do that when they've got power bars, right? And it's less effective when they've got Astro Harness. But you tag him in, let him take a few swings. They miss, and all of a sudden, totally wide open, completely unblocked special, mop up the other team with Blackest Night Flash.
So there we go.
Yeah. I think... the related thought, though, too, when I was thinking Necron Scythe, one thing I've been seeing in a lot of fights recently that is super effective is New 52 Shazam, who, if he gets down to 25% health or less, he gets tagged out, and when he comes back in, he can't be knocked out for a while, but his health is already really low. He'd be perfect for Necron Scythe. And he is, because that's actually one of the most difficult fights, because he's doing extra damage, and he does that for a long time, so he holds at that low health for way longer than anybody else. Like, the problem with Boss Solomon Grundy is he
gets down, he gets his benefits, and then he's knocked out.
Yeah.
Like nothing. So
he's like the perfect Necron Scythe guy, and super effective. Those are some of the toughest fights. And the main answer I've got for that is using my specialist and doing specials over and over again in order to keep him from hitting me.
Yeah.
But the problem is, New 52 Shazam, if he builds up a bar 2 of energy or power, he will be able to get his special off before I do. And then there's still a little bit of uncertainty there where he's, the outcome of the fight is not so settled. So yeah, I think if anybody's looking for a tip, that's our tip for this week.
So there we go. Yeah, and if there's 2 things you have to take away from this video, it's that and Milky. I can't. I'm still thinking about it. That's gonna stick around in my head for another couple days. I'm glad
you didn't tell me that before, because I don't know if I could have, like, that is just...
If you could have faked the reaction.
I did. Oh, God. Like, that was...
You can only hear it for the first time one time.
That's true.
Yeah.
There's no way I would have guessed that. Mickey was easy.
Yeah.
Milky, there is no way.
Mickey you get for sure. There's no way. And then you have another chance. And it's... Okay. I almost wish that we took that opportunity to be like, pause the video now and comment what you think, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do as a YouTuber. You're supposed to force false engagement, right? Where you give people an excuse to comment, even though it's just about to be resolved. Yeah. So if you've listened all the way to the end of the video, help us correct our mistake and comment something. Put something in the comment. You can just write the word Milky. And anybody who doesn't listen to the whole thing will be confused. I don't know.
We are clearly not very good YouTubers.
Also, it's going to be like, I don't know what we're not going to make more money from it anyway. So like at the volume that we're at, I don't think it matters. But, I think you're supposed to want that. So do it or whatever if you want to.
All right.
I guess. Okay. This is good. Gone off the rails right at the end.
Yep.
But anyways, so we've got a lot of people that we'd like to thank. We'd like to give, first off, a shout out to Eliza Co-op Decider Caton. She's trying to decide between a higher paying job and one that she's more interested in for a co-op term, which is a decision I don't envy at all.
Oh, more interest. Absolutely more interest. When you're at the early stage of your career, it gives you a better chance to figure out what you want to do.
But she's looking at setting up for doing like grad school and having money for grad school properly.
You know what? One thing that I regret that I think a lot more people could do, when you're young, people push you harder to try to do everything well. Mm-hmm. And I think what they don't do enough is let people really follow what they love, because not everybody always finds that. And if you have the opportunity when you're young, when you're sort of all the potential outcomes branch out and none of them have been pruned away, take it.
Okay. So there we go.
I know she'll never watch this, so.
Yeah. Well, I'll let her know. This shout out has been brought to you by 2 semesters of co-op job placement. Right. And we'd also like to give a huge thank you to everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. That's Consul, Peasant, and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., and Irvin Ruiz, who are supporting us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf and Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, and Gavin Malott at the gratitude level. Thank you all so much for your support. Thanks so much to all of you for however you engage with us. We do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.